In the spring of 1984, something started happening in the Persian Gulf that the major newspapers barely covered. Ships were getting hit. Not by accident, not by pirates, by missiles, by mines that appeared overnight in shipping lanes that had been considered safe for decades. The Reagan administration, which was, to put it gently, deeply invested in who won the Iran-Iraq war, looked the other way as the conflict crept slowly and then all at once into the open water. By 1987, it had gotten so bad that the US Navy was literally escorting Kuwaiti oil tankers through the Gulf under American flags. A military operation called Operation Earnest Will, because the risk of a tanker getting hit on any given night had become too high to ignore. 40 years ago, a different war, a different set of players, and yet the same narrow waters, the same choke point, the same catastrophic vulnerability embedded in the global economy like a fault line that everyone knows is there and nobody quite knows what to do about. I'm telling you this not because history always repeats itself. It doesn't, not exactly. But because what happened this week in the Arabian Gulf did not emerge from nowhere. It has a context. It has a lineage. And if you understand where this fits in that lineage, the news this week becomes not just alarming, but clarifying. Here's what we know. According to reports from Iranian state media, naval forces connected to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps claimed responsibility for striking a US-linked oil tanker traveling through the northern Persian Gulf. Iranian officials said the vessel was hit deliberately, struck and left burning in the water, as what they described as a retaliatory action in response to the broader confrontation now unfolding in the region. The tanker, navigating one of the most heavily trafficked energy corridors on the planet, began sending distress signals shortly after the explosion. Nearby vessels reported seeing a fireball. Maritime radio channels lit up with emergency traffic. And within hours, the story was no longer just a regional incident. Before I get to what happened next, if you're not subscribed yet, now would be a good time, because what comes next changes everything. Hit subscribe. We'll be right here. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The Arabian Gulf, and specifically the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow passage at its southern end, handles an almost incomprehensible volume of the world's energy supply. We're talking about roughly 1/5 of all the oil traded globally, passing through a corridor so narrow that in strategic terms, it barely qualifies as a corridor at all. Saudi Arabia ships through it. Kuwait ships through it. Iraq, the UAE, Iran itself, all of them send their oil through this bottleneck on the way to refineries in Asia, in Europe, in the United States. Every single day, millions of barrels, tankers the size of small towns, moving slowly through waters that are now, quite directly, a battlefield. And here's the thing. When something goes wrong in the Strait of Hormuz, when a ship gets hit, when a mine appears, when a naval skirmish sends emergency signals bouncing off satellite transponders across the Gulf, the global economy doesn't wait for the diplomats to sort it out. It reacts immediately, viscerally. Because energy markets are not patient institutions. They price in risk in real time. And the risk right now is very, very real. Within hours of the reports about this tanker strike, oil prices began climbing. Energy traders started calculating, as they always do, as they are professionally required to do, the probability that this was not an isolated event. That if one tanker could be struck today, another could be struck tomorrow. That if the IRGC was willing to target a vessel in the northern Gulf this week, the strait itself might not be safe next week. And that calculation, that cold actuarial calculus of shipping risk, started moving prices. Diesel prices in the United States surged past $4 a gallon for the first time in nearly 2 years. That number might sound like a data point, but it isn't really. It's a pressure wave. Because diesel doesn't just power the trucks at the gas station. Diesel powers the trucks that bring food to your grocery store. It powers the freight trains moving goods across the country. It powers the agricultural machinery that plants and harvests crops. When diesel goes up, everything that touches diesel goes up. Food prices, shipping costs, manufacturing overhead. The cascading economic consequences of a single tanker on fire in the Persian Gulf can reach a gas station in Ohio, a family's grocery budget in Minnesota, faster than most people realize. I know, stay with me here, because this is the part that I think doesn't get said clearly enough. The Iranian strategy, if we want to call it that, in targeting commercial shipping, is not simply military. It is economic coercion at a global scale. By demonstrating the ability to strike oil tankers in the Gulf, Iran is sending a message to every country that depends on Gulf oil. Every country in Asia that imports its energy from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and the UAE. Every European nation that routes tankers through Hormuz. The message is, this supply chain is fragile. We can reach it. And if you continue to align with our adversaries, we will reach it again. Iranian commanders said in their statements following the strike that ships associated with their adversaries would no longer move freely through the region if hostilities continued. That is not a vague threat. That is an operational doctrine. And the United States Navy, which maintains a significant presence in the Gulf specifically to prevent this kind of thing, is now in the position of trying to protect an enormous volume of commercial traffic moving through waters that a hostile actor has just demonstrated, again, that it is willing to contest. Now, the shipping industry responded the way it always does when a major incident happens in the Gulf. Vessels began slowing their routes, pending updated security assessments. Maritime organizations issued warnings. And, this part is important, insurance companies began reviewing their war risk calculations. War risk insurance is not a technicality. It is the financial infrastructure that makes commercial shipping possible in dangerous waters. When risk goes up, premiums go up. When premiums go up, it costs more to move oil. When it costs more to move oil, that cost passes through the supply chain to consumers. It's not dramatic in the way that a fireball over the Gulf is dramatic, but its effects are just as real and in some ways more durable. Analysts warn that if attacks on tankers continue, crude oil could approach $100 per barrel. That kind of spike would send gasoline prices climbing sharply across the United States. Airlines would face higher jet fuel costs. Shipping companies would see margins compress. The ripple effects would move through the global economy in ways that are difficult to predict once they begin. Like this video if you think more people should know about this. Continuing. The United States military has intensified naval patrols in the Gulf following the strike. Warships are monitoring shipping lanes more closely. Surveillance aircraft are scanning the waters. The challenge, a genuine strategic challenge, is that the Gulf is crowded. Oil tankers, cargo vessels, fishing boats, military ships, all of them sharing the same narrow waterways. Protecting every vessel is not a logistical problem that additional warships can simply solve. And here, and I think this is the part that nobody is quite saying out loud yet, is where the situation becomes genuinely, historically dangerous. Not because of what has already happened, because of what the logic of the situation implies might happen next. When one side demonstrates that it can strike commercial shipping, and the other side responds by increasing military presence, And the first side has already announced that ships will not move freely if hostilities continue. You have the architecture of an escalating cycle, one that we have seen before. In these same waters, 40 years ago. Energy importing nations in Asia are watching this with deep alarm. Europe is watching. Countries that maintain strategic petroleum reserves, which exist precisely for moments like this, are calculating whether those reserves would actually be sufficient if Gulf shipping were disrupted for weeks rather than days. The tanker that was struck this week is still the focus of international attention. Maritime authorities are still issuing caution warnings. Insurance companies are still running their numbers. Oil traders are still watching the futures markets. And military forces across the region remain on high alert. One explosion in the Arabian Gulf has reminded every government, every energy trader, every shipping executive, and every policymaker in Washington just how